So it's traditional when you go to meditation retreats. So the way a sort of traditional retreat would work is you would go for several days and you would stay in silence the whole time. And throughout the day you would practice seated meditation or walking meditation, yoga. You would eat in silence with mindfulness. And then each evening there's the teachers who are there share some talk or teaching about mindfulness or meditation. That's like the big time of the day because you actually hear words. So we like to take a little bit of time and do a small, short teaching about meditation. And this afternoon, I thought that it might be useful to talk a little bit about why do we do this practice? What are the benefits of doing this practice? Particularly on a beautiful day like today, where our minds are probably pulled to all the different things we could be doing. I'm guessing that you all have wondered about and asked yourself, what is the point of doing this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about my reasons for practicing, why I do it. But of course, I wouldn't want you guys to believe that or do that just because I said so. It's really important for you to experience these practices yourselves. Be curious, pay attention, and see what you notice, and see if you find it personally useful in the same way that I have, and that Brendan and Jenny have as well. So for one thing, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of scientific research on mindfulness and its usefulness. There have been a number of neuroimaging studies that show with only 8 weeks of practice, about 30 minutes a day, there are visible and significant changes in your brain structure. The part of your brain, the hippocampus, that is involved in memory, retention, focus, learning, and empathy gets measurably larger. And the part of your brain that's referred to as the fear center, the amygdala, the part of your brain that makes you feel anxious and worried, gets measurably smaller. It literally shrinks. And that corresponds with people noting feeling less anxious and worried, and also feeling their ability to focus and concentrate and remember is improved. Other studies showing that a similar amount of meditation, 8 weeks, 30 minutes most days, changes the functioning of the brain patterns of activation. And brains shift from patterns that are more consistent with negative feelings to patterns that show more consistent positive feelings. And along with that change, there is an improved effectiveness or strength of the immune system. People given flu shots and then spend 8 weeks meditating have a more robust response. Their immune system responds more strongly to the vaccination. Here at Duke, we did a study. We studied students who went through our 4-week Koru class. And after 4 weeks of just meditating 10 minutes a day, there were measurable improvements in sleep, perceived stress, mindfulness, and self-compassion with only 4 weeks of meditation practice. So there's quite a bit of data showing that both your brain function, your brain structure, and your experience of stress and the quality of your life improves with meditation. Let me say more about perceived stress and how we perceive our stress. Most of us think that we are stressed because of what is happening in our lives. That's the way it feels to us. If things were happening differently, we wouldn't feel so stressed. Actually, most of our stress is not the result of what is actually happening, but more the result of the way we think about and perceive what is actually happening. There's a story that is often told to illustrate this point. Many years ago, there were 2 monks walking down a path on a beautiful day in the countryside. And the path led them to a river. And at the river was a woman standing beside the river, an old woman who was very feeble. And she was in great distress. The bridge over the river had collapsed, and she could not get across the river. And she said to these monks, "Can you please help me? I need to get to my family. It's very important that I return home, but I cannot get across this river." So the older monk, who was the senior teacher, the leader of their community, a very wise and venerable teacher, lifted the woman onto his back and carried her across the river. The other monk followed. He was the younger monk, a student, a new student in their community. The older monk placed the woman on the river. She thanked him profusely, and the two monks carried on down the path. The younger monk was furious. He was so upset. He started berating the senior monk. "Why did you do that? I cannot believe you did that. You broke one of the most important vows of our community. We do not touch females. We do not allow females to touch us. I cannot believe you did that. You've betrayed everything that I believed about you. I don't see I can ever respect you again." And they walked on. It's a beautiful day. They're walking through the countryside. They go a couple more miles. The younger monk is still just fuming and berating the older monk. And finally, the older monk turns to the younger monk and says, "I left that woman on the bank at the riverside. Why are you still carrying her on your back?" So how many things are we carrying on our backs that we could have left by the riverside? Some of the things that we perceive as stress are things that maybe we could have left on the bank of the river or approached them differently. Students are commonly extremely stressed by having to finish papers or projects, getting their work done on time. I'm sure you guys have all experienced that. And it really feels like the work that you are doing is causing the stress, right? So let's say you're sitting at the computer and you're trying to write a paper and you're having a really hard time, and maybe you're having thoughts like, "I hate this. I can't do this. I'm horrible at this." Or maybe you're thinking, "That professor, she's a total jerk. I can't believe she assigned me this. Stupid is horrible. I'll never get it done. I'm going to make an F. I know I'm going to make an F. I'm going to fail out. I'm never going to graduate. I'll be homeless." So you can be having all these thoughts. But what is actually happening, right? You're probably sitting in a comfortable chair. Your fingers are probably just typing on the keyboard. Nobody's pinching you or stabbing you. The room's probably a comfortable temperature. You might even have a warm drink. So what if you could just notice those things and allow your thoughts to be about the information that you're organizing and the paper that you're writing? Maybe it wouldn't have to be so miserable. Maybe it's the way you're thinking about it that's producing a lot of the discomfort. All the time, I do this to myself, when I'm washing dishes at night. I can be really grumpy about that. I'm tired. I've got a busy life, a job, a husband, a child, a dog that has to be walked. And sometimes at the end of the day, I'm just tired. I don't want to wash the dishes. And I'll often find myself doing it thinking, it's not fair. Why do I have to wash the dishes? Why does no one else ever wash the dishes? Which is, by the way, not true at all. I probably wash dishes less than anyone else in the family. But I can work myself into a real state. But what am I really doing? If I remember to pay attention, what am I really doing? There's warm water on my hands. There's the pleasant smell of soap bubbles. Maybe the sound of clinking dishes. The feel of my arm as I wipe down the cabinet. And if I can remember and pay attention to that, my mood is very different when I've finished washing dishes than it is if I spend the whole time ruminating about how horrible it is to wash dishes. So what are the things in your life that you struggle with? And you might notice that really most of the struggle is the way you think about it and not so much the thing that you're doing. And our stress levels are different if we approach things differently. You can be just as busy, accomplishing just as many things, but they will feel differently to them if you can learn to just stay present and engage with each task as it comes. Another reason mindfulness and meditation is particularly helpful for you guys has to do with the stage of development you're in. People between about the ages of 18 and 29 or 30 are called emerging adults. You guys are emerging adults. And emerging adulthood is a really interesting time of life. It's also pretty challenging. This is the time of life where you're really trying to figure out who you are, like authentically. Who am I? What do I care about? What are my values? One thing that we know about happiness research shows that if we are doing jobs and living our life in a way that is consistent with what we value, we are much more likely to be happy, feel happy. So part of the task of being an emerging adult is figuring out what are those things, what are my values. Mindfulness is one way of starting to get a handle on that. So you can develop wisdom about who you are that informs all the choices you have to make. Because you may make more choices about your life in these years than at any other time in your life. What career do you aspire to? What are the choices you make that most likely lead you in that direction? Who do you want to spend your life with? What sort of person? These are all really important decisions, and they all get made in your 20s for the most part. So it helps to have some wisdom. It's another story, another wise teacher and a young student, and the student comes to the wise old teacher and says, "How do I find happiness? How does one become happy?" And the wise teacher says, "Oh, it's so simple. Happiness is simple. Good choices. That's all, just good choices." And the student said, "Okay, but how do I learn to make good choices?" "Oh, also very simple, wisdom. And the student says, "Okay, but how do I develop wisdom?" And the wise teacher says, "Also very simple. Bad choices." Bad choices that you pay attention to. And you guys are in the stage of life that you're making a lot of choices. And if you can figure out which ones were kind of the bad ones, then maybe you can do things differently. There was a student who took Koru, our mindfulness and meditation class, a few years back, and she told us all a story that I think really exemplified this. So she was a grad student, very busy. She's in a science profession, had lots of pressure on her, and her way of de-stressing was to go shopping on the weekends. She had what she called shop therapy, and all through the week, the way she got through the week is she'd be looking forward to the weekend when she would go shopping and have her shop therapy, because she thought, that's what makes me feel better. So she started this meditation practice because of Koru, and in Koru we ask you to meditate 10 minutes a day, so she'd been doing that for a couple weeks, and she was getting better at noticing her reaction, noticing her thoughts. And she was at the mall one weekend for her shop therapy, and she noticed actually that when she got to the mall, she started having these kind of self-critical, self-judgmental thoughts that she hadn't been having before. She started comparing herself to other people, starting to feel bad about her body and the way she looked, about the amount of money she had. And then when she started feeling that way, she would buy things to make herself feel better. And then she noticed that she was kind of feeling bad because she didn't actually have any money. She was a graduate student, so she really felt bad for kind of wasting her money. So she was really surprised to see that what she was doing to make herself feel better actually was making herself feel a little bit worse. That was a surprise to her. So she thought, well, what if I made different choices? Maybe shop therapy isn't the best thing for me. What would happen if I did something else on the weekend? So she experimented. She took walks with friends. She spent more time outside. She read books. She visited a family member that wasn't too far away. And she noticed that those self-judging thoughts that she'd always really struggled with were more quiet when she avoided shopping. And then she also felt a little bit better because she wasn't so stressed about her financial situation. And she felt like this was like a really remarkable little bit of wisdom that she had developed that was kind of having profound choices. And it was just because she had paid attention. An assumption that she'd always made and had never really looked at, she discovered was not as accurate as she thought. So we develop wisdom, and we start making better choices as we start to see more authentically who we are, what we care about. And mindfulness is one of the best practices I know for doing that. Now, another thing that mindfulness and meditation helps with is resilience. So resilience is our capacity to bounce back when we face difficulties. Because, let's face it, life being life, there are easy times and there are hard times. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. Sometimes we get an A, sometimes we don't. Sometimes the person we love loves us back. Sometimes they don't, right? So things are going to happen to us in life. And the more resilient we are, the more easily we can bounce back from these things. The more quickly we kind of get on with it and experience ourselves as having a more satisfying life. An oft-used metaphor with mindfulness is how life, there are these waves, and some waves are small and some waves are big, but with mindfulness, we learn to surf the waves. We can ride those easy waves. We also get better at riding the big waves. One way to think about resilience is it's your capacity to tolerate discomfort. We are very practiced at avoiding discomfort, and smartphones make that so much easier. Most of us will not tolerate a second of boredom or self-consciousness or restlessness. We immediately turn to our phones, right? Or whatever else we have. But I really noticed that makes it even easier to avoid discomfort. The problem is when we avoid discomfort all the time, which you'd think would be a good idea, our capacity to tolerate it just starts to shrink. And like I said, there's no way we're going to avoid all discomfort, right? I mean, life is life. Things happen. So if you think of your ability to tolerate discomfort as this magic bowl that shrinks or expands, every time you avoid discomfort, your bowl shrinks. And it can shrink down to the size of like a little espresso cup. So, one person snaps at you and you're overwhelmed. One bad grade and you feel like you can't tolerate it. One worry and you just can't bounce back. But as you develop resilience, your bowl magically enlarges, and you get to the point where you can tolerate more discomfort. A bad grade, maybe an unreturned text, a crashed hard drive, you can deal with all that. You can take it in stride. And meditation helps us do that because we just sit, we notice what comes up. Sometimes it's relaxing feelings, sometimes it's uncomfortable, worried feelings, sometimes it's an itch. But we just notice it and we breathe through it. And we begin to trust that we can ride through discomfort without dying. And we also begin to trust that it's temporary. We see it come, we see it go. We just breathe. And as you do that, your magical resilience bowl gets bigger and bigger, maybe up to the size of a bathtub. So there's the science, the way that mindfulness and meditation can help our nervous systems function in ways that are important to us. There's the developing of wisdom, which is important to people who are in your stage of life. There's the increase of resilience, which is important to all of us. And I've experienced all these things, and I'm certain that all of that fuels my motivation to continue with this. But the other thing about mindfulness and meditation that maybe for me is what kind of keeps me engaged with it is the way that it allows me to just be more open to the richness and beauty and joy that I have in my life. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's a very sort of famous meditation teacher in this country, he has a quote that I never get quite right, but it's something about mindfulness is about keeping in the front of your mind the beauty and the miracle and the mystery of our lives. A number of years ago, when my daughter was just 3 or 4 years old, I was really looking forward to decorating the Christmas tree because she was finally at an age where I knew she was going to get a lot of pleasure out of it. It was going to be a lot of fun. So, we had the tree, we had the ornaments, the day had come, she'd been looking forward to it, the whole family, we'd been looking forward to it. And I notice we're not very far into it, and I am feeling pressured and annoyed. And like, this is taking too long. I found myself being irritated at her. Do you have to look at every single ornament? I was not having any fun. I was just thinking about why this was taking so long. And it was something I'd really looked forward to. And as soon as I noticed that that's what I was doing, I remembered to check back into my mindfulness. And what was really happening when I started to pay attention was that little girl just had complete delight on her face as she examined each of these ornaments. And the pine trees smelled beautiful, and the lights were twinkling. And in that moment, that's what we were doing. It didn't matter that I had to put the boxes away and bake cookies. And in that instant, my experience completely changed. I went from being stressed out because it was taking too long to feeling just complete pleasure and joyfulness and peace at this moment that I was sharing with my young child. Our lives are filled with those kind of moments. How many moments do we have in our lives? How many of those moments are absolutely exquisite? How many of those do you want to miss? Might be nice to catch as many of those as we can, right? So as we practice mindfulness, we learn to tune into those moments. And I think for me, every day that's something that makes me appreciate my good fortune in having developed this practice.